Lifecom Broadcasting Network TV, aka LCBN TV, is committed to bringing the transformation message of Jesus Christ into homes across the world, providing hope in the most desperate situations. We are passionate about souls, reaching the lost, the hurt, and the lonely, and by a click of a button, God can change a person's life forever. Watch LCBN TV channel 24/7 on UK Freeview channel 271, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, See Love World, Google TV, LCBNTV.com, LifecomTV.com. Download LCBN TV app from Google Play and App Store. LCBN TV, just in time.
And hello and good evening and welcome to LCBN TV, where today we are on a roundtable talking about gospel music, and does gospel music or black music in the UK matter? We are talking about gospel music simply because in the last few weeks we have seen regarding the events in the UK and the US that racial injustices have been happening for years to the Black community in general, and that we are now trying to not only reconcile but find solution to how to fix the racial injustices that have been taking place all over the world. And today in the UK, we are having a conversation on how we can improve the gospel industry and the gospel music in general for it to be accepted, and also for it to expand within the UK, and look at the experiences of the past and how we can improve today on what we have worked on before. So today I have with me online Sandra Godley, who is the BBC radio presenter from Coventry. Good evening, Sandra. Thank you for joining me this evening.
Hello, nice to be with you this evening. Thank you for inviting me.
Good evening. And then I have with me Dave B. from is the founder and owner of Eugene Jams Radio.
Good evening. Thanks for having me today.
Good evening, Dave. And I also have with me, I will call him UK producer, but also radio presenter on Premier Gospel and Premier Christian Radio, Ibe Giant Killer.
Good to be with you guys.
How are you tonight? I like the position and the chilling pose you have on tonight, Ibe.
You know how we do.
Well done. I also have with me on this chat, we have Basil Maid, who is the leader and the head of LCGC, which is the London Gospel Community Choir. Welcome, Basil.
Hi. Did you mean London Community Gospel Choir?
London Gospel?
No, London Community Gospel.
Community Gospel Choir.
It's a mistake that many make, don't worry.
Oh, so you're teasing me. All right, then. Thanks for that. And then I have Juliet Fletcher with us tonight as well, who is the founder of GMIA, which is the Gospel Music Alliance, or International Alliance, I will say. Hello, Juliet.
And it's great to be with you. It's lovely to be part of this, what I believe will be a very interesting conversation with the likes of the individuals who've gathered together, dear Faith.
Oh, lovely. Absolutely wonderful. Well, Juliet, I'm going to start with you today because really we want to know about, personally, I want to know about the history of gospel music. But before we go into history, how did we come to this, where we have a music industry that doesn't recognize necessarily the music or the black music that is being represented in the UK? What was the journey that brought us all this way?
Well, if I'm giving a picture of what it was like for those who started the journey, it was those who came over from the Caribbean. Yesterday was Windrush Day, the day which has been marked 72 years on since people from the Caribbean mainly arrived in the UK, and as it's known now, many of them arrived to rebuild Britain, to be part of, some of them knew Britain as the motherland, because of the Commonwealth, because they were citizens in the colonies that they were a part of, and they came here to the UK with an intent and a pure heart to be a part of what was to be a new phase of the future of Great Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And there were those that came with just for work,
Mm-hmm.
but they all came with their faith. For these are the ones that we're talking about. Those who all came with their faith. Some came as missionaries,
Mm-hmm.
people who had an intent to be part of evangelizing the nations. And there are others who came that were already members of established churches, like the Methodist Church of England, the Reformed Church, and so on, the Baptists. These were all established churches in the Caribbean, and they were members of them, and they came here to participate in being part of the Christian, the family of the Christian fellowship in the UK. However, those two sets of people had different experiences. On the one hand, those who came as missionaries found themselves facing lots of challenges in terms of settling in as a life, not having access to places of independent worship, hiring their own building, or being they didn't even hardly have anywhere to live, as
Wow.
the famous phrase was when
Mm-hmm.
they tried to get accommodation: no Irish, no blacks, no dogs. That was the main thing that I know even my parents experienced. There are others who went to established churches, and as we know, one of those individuals was Carmen Jones of the Pentecostal Credit Union, the most established financial institution within the Black community, and one of the top financial institutions in this country of credit unions. And he came as a member of an established church, only to be told after a visit or two, please don't come back. And it was out of those experiences that I do know personally the story of one gentleman who sadly is no longer with us, Bishop Kenneth McCarthy, who I would call the father of the promotion of British gospel music. He came as someone who was attached to an independent church, and he said, when I stood in Brixton at the corner of Acre Lane, and I saw all these black people wandering about like sheep without no shepherd, I knew that something had to happen. And he was one of those who started independent organizations for black churches, where lots of people began to find a welcoming arm, and out of that we began to develop these independent Caribbean church fellowships, from which we got the Church of God in Christ, which was one of the earliest established ones. That's where I'm from, Kojic. That you got the New Testament Church of God, Church of God of Prophecy, New Testament Assembly, which came as a mission outreach church started by Caribbeans in Jamaica, came here and established it as well. So it was out of all those experiences that people began to find that where they were not welcomed, and in their not being welcomed, they established their own setup and began this new communication level with people, because nobody had any real relationship with lots of these institutions and people that were around, and so they were starting from scratch. Many of them as evangelists, as leaders in their church, didn't have or didn't know a lot of the people that we begin to know now from the established churches, who can say, like the Evangelical Alliance, that they have some relationship with what is known as the African Caribbean churches in Britain.
But if I remember from the history, a lot of those who came through the Windrush came in with the hymns of old, and they were using the songs of the white majority churches of the Anglican churches. So how did that change? What brought the change from singing the traditional hymns to starting to build a musical sound that was unique to the UK?
Well, in the churches, the independent churches that formed, you had the basic music things like tambourines, accordions, guitar, acoustic guitar was established, and the country, the country and western kind of style of music was there, and the kind of like a Caribbean sound was in the particular way that Caribbeans sing. We had our own feeling from day one. It was always within the culture of the way in which we sang hymns. Because if you hear them in the Caribbean, that's how you would have heard them initially when they came here. They sang with their own fervour, with their own feeling, and certainly with their own style in terms of the instrumentation that they had, hand clapping, feet stomping, choruses that they got and created from amongst themselves, as well as what was passing through from America in the Caribbean and over to here. Original songs in the Caribbean, small choruses that were in the Caribbean that came here as well. They brought their songs with them, and they sang those songs within the churches, using those kind of instrumentations. You know, there wasn't drum kits and things to start with. It was mainly starting off with the tambourines, with the accordions, with the guitars, and things like that. Some people had trumpets. Basil will be able to remember things like that. And the own sound within the churches began to develop out that, and they used the same hymnal songs. They used the same hymn books. The Redemption hymnal was very popular. The Moody and Sankey hymns were very, very popular within the Caribbean churches, and they were all done in our own particular, peculiar way, and we sang those with passion.
So, Basil, how was it growing up as a young man in the UK at that time when you're having a shift in music from the traditional hymns of the Anglican Church to a new sound that you were probably part of, the people, you know, coming up with these new ideas on how the hymns should be sung in the church?
Well, in as much as you had this diversity of music, you got to remember that Jamaica's style of music was still a little bit different to what you would have heard if you went to a church, for example, where Monstrasians attended, or Bajans. That was the nature of our community. Each island, its group of islands, tend to have gravitated towards each other. And so where calypso or soca was probably the more prevalent style of music, you find those churches. When I went to Shiloh Church in Dawson in Hackney, I would hear soca. And that was the style, the prevalent style of music that was used in worship. But I went to another church like Crooked Field Road in Lower Clapton, where I attended, which was a New Testament Church of God. It was definitely Jamaican based. Okay. The music was I think it was more like the ska style. We're going back into the late 60s and 70s now, and then it kind of moved on into reggae and whatever styles was coming out of Jamaica. And in as much as we were told that it was wrong to be bringing worldly music into the music, my thing was, that is the culture. Why should we be embarrassed and shamed about the culture, the music that God has blessed us with? It permeated the whole culture, not just outside in the clubs, but it was also in the church. People lived among it, and it was an expression of our musicality in worship. And I always had a problem with that, because we were tending to, people were suggesting, no, it's only the music that you would hear in white churches is correct, or coming out of white America. So again, it's the same sort of the institutional racism that underpinned our belief, our belief systems. It was there, and it's still there now, and that's another subject for really getting into. But growing up back in those days, it was people were more. There were so many more characters. I mean, I used to play an accordion in church at times.
Wow.
When I started learning, I was blessed to play the piano and keyboards. The pastor, my mentor, Olive Paris, bought an accordion because we couldn't get a piano or big organ into the space we were worshiping in. So she bought a massive accordion, which strap on your shoulders is like weightlifting. And you had to learn how to play these things with the buttons on the left and the keyboard on the right hand side. So I had to provide music in service with this thing. But I learned, I did it. That's what was needed. And as Juliet said, there were all forms of instruments being used in worship back in those days. Somebody felt like they could play a trumpet. They weren't necessarily great at it, but they brought it into service and played guitar.
Wow.
Or whatever. So it was that vibrancy and yeah, it was very diverse, and people were trying to find their feet in terms of music in the church.
Juliet, I want to go back to you when it comes to the history, because I hear a little bit the same as what happened in the US, which is the new sound, the sound of the world entering the church was really not well received by elders, I hear.
Yes, that's very true, particularly as Bishop Kenneth McCarthy, when he started this group called the Soul Seekers, they were based on, drums, bass, guitar, and it was totally off of the kind of pop culture that was beginning to emerge out of the late 50s into the 60s. That, as a band, they were no different from what you would have found if you were listening to the Cliff Richard and the Shadows. In fact, they were on the road at the same time as Cliff Richard and the Shadows. And the whole idea was that the young people of that time had that same kind of desire to be involved in what was hip and what was the culture of the day. Now, what would happen in the churches of the time, is special singing. And I remember when someone was having a convention or any crusade, there would always be a special singers. I remember Evangelist Cameron, Asuda Cameron, was one of the great singers of the time. The traveling harmonizers were, even back then, they were a great band. Carmel Jones of the Pentecostal Union, he was in the band, and they all would do special singing at particular points within the church. The first time I was an eyewitness to a real band was the Heavenly Hopes, and they all dressed up in white suits as young men singing a special rendition in the church. And next thing I know, they were on Britain's #1 program called Opportunity Knocks, which was like Britain's Got Talent of our day. They went on there and they sang gospel songs, and they won their heat for the period. And that was an eye-opener, both to me as a person who was beginning more to sing, to hear sounds that was coming over on records that were from America, the James Cleveland LPs from Savoy. And Basil will know of the great crusades that were done by not Morris Royal, it was the other gentleman that was before him, but he had a great guy called Gene Martin, and he came over and he sang, and he had LPs with big songs on them that were gospel. So here was a beginning of a change where you had different singing, and they were driven by not so much being performers, but they were in a way a performance, but it was true ministry within the context of church service. But there was already in America some crossover experiences, because at that time Shirley Caesar was a young girl in the Caravans, was already on some early television programs singing, with the Caravans on programs that came across with gospel and the soul sound. And of course, soul is a direct child of gospel music, because of the great Sam Cooke. The late Sam Cooke, who left straight from singing in the gospel group to be the first soul star, and that began to drive not only what was happening in America, but also what was happening in other places in the Caribbean and over here in the UK. So the singer of who's fronting the Soul Seekers. He was actually, before he got saved, he was actually a top singer in Jamaica, and he got to #1 with Red Red Wine. So his conversion to come and sing gospel music was something very special as well. So here we're already beginning to see these changes that were affecting who these individuals began to rise up in the church, who they began to be, and who they began to share themselves as people who not only wanted to sing in church, but wanted to sing to a wider audience and be relevant to the people of the day. And it didn't go down well, but it was happening. Well, then they liked it along, because that's the way God planned it.
Amen.
As the great Billy Preston said.
Amen. So, Dave, I'm going to ask you, how was it, and how did it feel like to be part of this new emerging music that, as a young man, going to church with your parents and wanting to listen to your own type of music, but yet, you know, the music of the day was not really appealing to you?
I struggled. I struggled a lot, especially with my parents. And you know, when it came to groups like, I'm going kind of new school, so you're looking at Commission, and you're going back and you're looking at Danny Bell Hall or Andre Crouch. And I remember I brought an album home, which was vinyl, okay, at the time. And I saw, I kind of showed my mom and dad this picture of Danny Bell Hall. And she had, I'm coming from a Pentecostal background, and she had earrings on, and she had makeup on, and my dad just said, "That's not gospel. No way. That is not gospel." And going back to what Basil was talking about, because they came from a sort of like soca, that sort of calypso background from St. Kitts and Nevis. I'm not Jamaican, but I do love that sort of music, West Indian culture, and they wasn't into that at all. They didn't like it. But gospel music, for them, which they tried to put into me, had a big major play for me. And I had to really kind of adapt to their style and listen very carefully. But even though when I used to have little arguments with my father, I said, "Oh, Dad, come on, get with the program. These are new times right now. That was then, this is now." And it's not sanctified. It's not saved music. That can't help you. But those are the things I went through concerning that. But gospel music is very joyous, you know, and it has a heart. That's how I see gospel music as a young man growing up in that era, really, in the 70s, you know, 60s into 70s as well, and 80s. It really impacted me quite a lot, gospel music. So our parents did very well concerning that. And just to go back about musicians, I don't know if anybody remember the banjo, the 4-string sort of thing. And my dad used to play that. And when they got into guitars, it was always like, I think it's a chord of C, 3 notes all the time, through every song. That's what we used to get in some of our churches. And we started in the living room because my dad used to talk, and that's how we started. And gospel music really held me in a really nice place, just like many other artists or people who love gospel music. But that background for me, I got to appreciate where I'm coming from and from what my parents did for me at the end of the day.
So, Sandra, I want to see you nodding your head at what Dave is saying over there. I think you remember the banjos and you remember the earrings and the no makeup.
Yeah, I think I was born to be a tearaway, but listening to Juliet talk about hymnals like redemption hymnals, that's the kind of music that I was brought up in, Pentecostal Assemblies of God. And as a typical black child, was forced to go to church. It wasn't something I wanted to do. So forced to get out of the house. And back in the day, I don't know if you guys can remember, you know, the services were 3 times a day. And so I got my practice in for singing, and my passion started there with singing. But there was a lot that I didn't enjoy, which was the areas where you couldn't actually go outside of the church and sing this amazing message that would captivate you on a Sunday 3 times a day. And I found it stifling. So I started making steps outside of the church, still going to church, but finding avenues where I could actually just do my little thing, really. And a lot of that came through the youth group. And I remember doing lots of street work, being in the centre of the city that I lived in at the time, Derby and other cities, and evangelizing and using my music there and finding the real me in those moments where I was very vulnerable, and not singing to Christians, but actually singing to people who'd never heard the message. And I would always go back to what is gospel music actually about. And I know this session is about Black music, but of course the heart of Black music is gospel music. Yeah. And it is, I just found, even at my age of like 15, 16, it was just good news. To be honest with you, Faith, I just found that I kept singing it over and over to Christians, and really the people that needed it were outside. So finding my space with my little guitar, and I didn't play banjo, but I played a guitar for years. And that's how I wrote my songs. But the big thing for me is being born in Bristol, which is where I was born, meant that I was exposed not just to gospel music, but to all the other genres. Because if you're born in a city, you're going to be affected by all sorts of music. If you let yourself go. And yes, I was a Black person living in a Black community, but I went to school with white kids and Chinese kids, and some of their music seeped into me because that's what happened. And so I got very affected by other genres, and found it a struggle sometimes to find who was I really. And that's been an ongoing journey. But for me, it's about singing the good news through whatever style of music, including gospel, I can, to the people in my world. And that's something that's taken me a long, long time to discover. And so my root and heart is gospel because it's about a message. You know, I'm a Christian, but out of that come songs that talk about life, health, politics, the whole work. So I was nodding because listening to Dave talk about Danny Bell, man alive, I saw her the first time with her earrings, and I thought, I want to be like her. Andre, but they were all American, these people, and so it was hard to find British examples of that. And I just remember pastors saying to me, just do it yourself, be you. And that's the journey I've kind of been on in terms of remembering my music and how I've come to be who I am today.
But it's amazing that you say that the music was mainly within the church, and I wonder whether that was just another way of escaping or escapism from the racism that was on the street at that time. Because let's not forget, 70s, 80s, we're talking about police, mistreating and badly treating young men, young women, young Black women. Ibi, I want you to come on this because I remember you giving an experience of what you went through when you were at school here, and how you were mistreated at school. And maybe from that was then music your escape from the racism.
Yeah, I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s, and experiencing racism it was just like, it got to a point where you'd be called names so much it became numb. And music was a escapism for me. And it's funny because I didn't grow up in church. So I grew up on jazz funk. I grew up on people like Shalimar. And then I went into hip hop. My favorite thing was hip hop. And for me, hip hop was an escapism for me, where people were allowed to express how they feel in the way that they felt, for me, I got into gospel with Commissioned. Commissioned was the first group that I heard. I think that the first album that I got from them was State of Mind, which was around about 1990. And the reason why I got into them is because they sounded like an R&B group which was out in the world. And I thought, hey, hang on, this group has gone gospel. So let me hear more about them. I mean, for me, I was very much into hardcore R&B and hip hop. So gospel was hard for me. It was hard for me at the time because I felt that it was, and I'm coming from a young, we're talking about the young Ibe back then. I felt gospel couldn't penetrate me at the time. I felt that it was people from the church putting on a hat and I'm talking about the R&B gospel. I'm talking about the hip hop. I'm talking about R&B gospel. I felt that they were putting on a hat and saying, "Hey, man, you know, we want to reach you young people in the streets, man, and we're hip just like you, man. Look, I got my hat, man. I got my glasses. I'm just as cool as you, man. Hibbity hop, hop, hop." And I felt that this music is not penetrating me until I heard Commission, and I just heard it was the writing. It was Fred Hammond, you know, Marvin Sapp had, I don't know, no, he hadn't joined them then, but it was that group. And I remember speaking to one of the guys, Carl Reed, a couple of days ago, and it was a particular song called Everlasting Love. That was the song that penetrated my heart. And then I was able to listen to gospel after that. I didn't understand it. I grew up watching programs like People Get Ready and thinking that it was the British coming to America, you know, with people just jumping all over the place and having fun. That was church to me. That's what that was church to me. When I saw Bishop doing what he was doing, I mean, that was my early memory of gospel. And then actually going to a church, because my parents are Nigerian. I opted to go to a Caribbean church. I was actually in my early, from 1920, I grew up in a Caribbean church. And I learned so much about gospel music. One of the main people for me that really touched me was David Daniels, Pastor David Daniels. Such a humble guy with an amazing voice, really touched my heart. And listening to him sing, then you had people like, back in the day, you had LCGC, you had people like Brian Powell, you had Hutchison and Gale, remember those guys? There was so many people back then, but my main love was hip hop. And then I was introduced to a young man back then called Gifted, and he took hip hop, gospel hip hop, to another level. He brought the ministry side of hip hop into the gospel. And at the time it was difficult, because I remember going out with him and people say, "No, this hibbity hop thing, it's not of God. It's not of God. We don't, you're bringing the world into the church again." But what Gifted would do was he would stop and minister to people. And what he had was the word of God. And the word of God cuts through anything. No matter what, the word of God penetrated. And then I myself started to do and produce gospel, hip hop and R&B. I wanted to produce what I listened to out there, because I felt that I wanted people not to go through what I went through. I wanted them to feel something real, but also with the word of God in it.
Can I come in on that, what Ibe is saying? Because I think it's very important for people to realise what was that two things were happening at the same time from what he's describing. Because if you look at where we are with back then with the 70s and the 80s, and the social unrest that was there, that America had those songs and those music and those sounds that were coming across that were speaking to their generation. But our churches was all about not being involved in the politics of the day. So we had the choirs embodied that, and LCGC was an important part of embodying and keeping that strength and that inspiration that was going with strong gospel songs. But we didn't have a social context song. We didn't have a song that spoke into the racism of the day, because our church kept away from that. You know, it wasn't part of our concern. They were not into politics like that. And so even when we look at now with the George Floyd situation, I would like, and our racism day, I think it's a great opportunity now for our scene to be writing songs of lament, songs that speak to the heart of
and I'm sure
experiences people have had.
I'm sure
and that
to that, Juliet, I don't want to move the conversation too fast, I still want to see and ask Daniel, who is on the line with us, who we can't see at the moment. But Daniel Dustin, are you here? Hello, Daniel. Oh, okay. Daniel is not in with us at the moment. We're going to give him a little bit of time to come and connect. But all of you guys were around at that period, and I want us to touch on how did it feel to be a Black young person and going to church, having to face racism at home, outside of the church building, and then going to church and hearing the gospel and being able to reconcile that with the music.
Can I answer that one?
Yeah.
I grew up in Birmingham in Northfield, okay, and it was predominantly a National Front area, okay. So you had to really be on your guard. You had rockers, you had skinheads, and something Ibe mentioned about name calling. My goodness me, and the names were really severe in those days, really bad. And to a point, it affected me where I started to, put it this way, hate the other culture, okay? That I just wanted to not be with that culture at all. On the flip side of that, if I didn't have the church or didn't have my parents looking at people as human beings, okay, I would have been doing some terrible things at the end of the day. And I think on top of that, because how my parents were praying and that my mom used to sing, my dad used to sing and preach, that also helped heal the certain things because they used to face it as well. You know, how could a human being hate each other? We bleed the same. He used to tell me that every single time. But the National Frontier, man, where I grew up, it was horrific. We had to. In school, we had to run. We had to, and I remember, I remember a teacher in school. He was the headmaster, and he. I went to the dinner time. Went to the front of the queue. I was there first because I love my food anyway. I was there first, and he says, "Get to the back. Get to the back." And he touched me. I remember my dad said to me, "Don't let no man put his hand on you." Wow. Okay. Yeah, and the rest was history. He was on the floor, and that was it. But just a little bit of racism that got to me. But you know, if it wasn't for my parents, if it wasn't for God, I could tell you right now, it'll be a different story. You know, and when you see the genuine love from cultures, from white, black, Asians, it doesn't really matter. When you see that, you realize it's how they were brought up, and if you can penetrate that with the gift that you have by respecting or introducing them to God or music, whatever you want to do, then you know you would win quite easily. And my father, I have to say, he believed in that, and I do up till this day, you know. And I'm married to a beautiful woman who's white, and I used to hate white people. I have to say, I used to. Yeah. That's a deep thing for me.
So, Ibe, how was your experience as a child? Because we jumped into that. What was your experience of racism as a child in the UK?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in my junior school, and there was a particular teacher who just didn't like me. I think this is the issue that we had as young black people. Because teachers didn't understand the culture of black people, it was difficult for them to teach. And I'm going to say this: we get 2 weeks of black education
at the moment,
right? And when we get those 2 weeks, it was talking about slavery. It was talking about negativity. So as a young black man, they didn't empower us. You know, by default, we got white education. That was by default. And then for 2 weeks, we would get black education, or we would get black history. But there was nothing about black inventors or black writers or black actors. It was more the negative. So then you would see yourself as that. And the difficulty is that the teacher that I had, I don't know if he hated black people, but the way that he treated me, I mean, he would physically abuse me. Physically, he would hit me. He would call me out for things that I didn't do. And it got to a point where, as a young black man, in this country, we didn't have the Al Sharptons. We didn't have the Jesse Jacksons back then. And it was his word against mine. So it got to a point where I wouldn't say anything, because my thing is they wouldn't believe me anyway. So I took a lot of abuse. And it's funny because the other day I put a post out on Facebook, and during that post, I realized that a lot of the trauma, a lot of the stuff that had been said and the abuse had traumatized me, and that I needed healing.
Yeah.
There was a lot of healing. It was like the George Floyd thing had ripped open a wound that had been covered up for years. And I realized this has really traumatized me. And seeing that man with his knee on his neck, it just brought back a memory of how I felt growing up and wanting to learn and being told that I wouldn't amount to anything. And the other white boys excelling and me not moving forward due to fear, of not knowing who I was. And I think the most important thing that we can do now in our music is educate. We can educate.
Sandra, I want to come to you when it comes to, we've had the experience of the men, but what was it as a young woman growing up, in this environment? And then how did you cope? Was music your escape as well?
Yeah, I can't remember at primary school having moments where it was obviously my colour that was an issue. I don't remember that, and I'll be really honest about that. I don't remember myself coming home and crying. We lived in a very multicultural environment in Bristol, Asian, black, white, the whole lot. So somehow that was great for me. I've faced it more as a systemic thing, as a woman, a black woman, in more recent years. It's the lack of progression. It's the unseen, the ceiling that you can reach or not reach. It's been in the disappointment of not being appointed in roles that I've known that I'm more than qualified for. They're the areas where I found it. And I have to say that what I found with a lot of people that aren't of our colour, they expect us to do things like singing. For some reason, singing and sports, we can excel and that's safe. We expect you to do that. That might be quite controversial, but that's been my experience. But you step outside of singing and do something like, well, I want to be a director of an organisation, or I want to bring my wisdom and experience into other areas of life, it starts to get a little bit shady. So as a woman, I found that a challenge, and I've been able to tell that, because lots of roles I've applied for, I'm more than qualified for, giving it to somebody that's a different color to me, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? So I've seen it recently. I've been marched out of a boardroom before.
Wow.
There's a whole load of things that have happened more recently as a older woman that's black. And that's my issue now, and that's what I'm trying to teach my own children and younger people. But actually, how you start is you can't help that. But once you become a mature person, you can change situations and you can influence. But it's the unspoken racism. It's the unspoken decision not to elect women into senior roles because they're black and female. There's a double whammy there. And I find that something that is a challenge that I will keep fighting for as long as I can do.
I'm going to bring in Daniel now on the side of, as an African Ghanaian man living in the UK. I don't know whether you grew up here or not, but what has been your experience of racism even in this music industry?
Thank you, Reverend Faith. I didn't grow up here in the UK. I have lived here for just about 12 years, I should say.
Mm.
And personally, I wouldn't say I have experienced racism, but when it comes to the music side of things, I think it shows in the representation that is given to African gospel music when you have to look into the media and even look at how the media is structured here in the UK and how the music representation is. You can clearly see that there is no room for African gospel, as it were. I think on top of mind, the only station that I can recollect that has given some form of prominence to African gospel music is Premier Gospel, where they have a lot of African gospel music presenters on, and also have a dedicated show that promotes and looks at African gospel. ABN came on board and was doing the same thing, but unfortunately it's no more now. So there is not really an outlet, and if you consider it critically, you will realize that I can't say I may not have the data to back it up, but but just by observation, you can see that there is some sort of a limitation as far as even the media space is concerned for the expression of African gospel music. And by African gospel music, I'm talking about the traditional export that comes with the passionate, strong, high life,
Yeah.
that permeates the gospel and is experienced in a lot of traditional African churches. When you go there, I don't really hear. You need to change the sound if you want to get airplay. You need to change the sound. You need to change the way that even the sonics of the music needs to be altered a bit if it needs to get the chance for airplay. Now, I think just recently that I submitted a track from a friend of mine to UCB, and thankfully it got selected to play on one of the shows. But even if you look at the production, she sounds like Hillsong, and that was the only reason why.
But she was
Yeah,
African artist.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you don't know her name and you don't know who produced the music, you wouldn't know that she's even a Ghanaian.
Yeah.
But that is the only reason why it was selected. I look at the playlist of a lot of the radio stations each and every day, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, is there any room for us at all? Which I don't think there is.
I'm going to come to Sandra with the question of how we can resolve that. But before I go to Sandra, I want to ask the radio guys, whether, Dave or Ibe, why is it that gospel is struggling today to be heard on the major platforms?
It's to do. This is a really difficult one. If I can be honest, it's to do with a lot of red tape, and it's to do with what you really like, what genre of music you really like at the end of the day. It's also to do with your presenters. If they have influence, they will say, well, that is good, put it on right now, please do play it, let's support this artist. And it's also to do with production as well. A radio station would know what they're looking for, the sound, and I always say, before you send something in, do check out the format of the station. You can't be sending in classical music because it won't work on that station, particular station, but some artists do. But going back to African music, I hear the struggle, I really do, and it's just the way it is. And sometimes what you have to do, if you can't beat that system, build your own. That's it. And that is something which I believe in and which I had to do. I'm not knocking any other radio station, but I believe that, building your own is much better. Other people will follow. They will jump on and say, you know what, I appreciate you supporting R&B, African music or reggae, whatever. They will jump on and support if you show them respect and appreciate these artists. But first and foremost, your production has to be very good. Otherwise, you are not getting any airplay.
But don't you think that it also has to do with the fact that it's Black music? And I'm going to go to eBay with that question. or okay, eBay's away for a little bit. Okay, no
I
problem.
don't think it's anything to do with black. I don't think it's anything to do with black music. It's just got a
yeah,
production of the right.
okay.
Juliet.
eBay, what's your take? All right, so I'm going to take Juliet then in the meantime. If Juliet is ready.
Hello.
Can we take Juliet, please? Jay.
You hear me?
Yes, okay, you're
Yes.
back. Thank you.
Yeah. We're talking about two different things here, because we say, is black music still needed? Is black music still relevant? Is that we're talking about systems here
Okay.
in the Caribbean and in certain parts of countries, in African countries. There is an acceptance about the way in which the spirituality of the music is integrated into the life of that nation. You can go to Barbados and you can hear gospel music on various mainstream stations, because you can go to Jamaica and you'll hear a lot of gospel music. You'll hear music playing in the supermarket. It's an accepted part of the cultural, the nature of those countries. In the UK, the whole music business is a completely the systems that exist. It were developed in a totally different way, which hasn't included black music in the same way.
Yeah.
So I remember when in the 70s and in the 80s, when the great era of Brit funk was in, with great bands like Light of the World, Central Line, and all those great acts, Basil. Our music was very powerful in those times, and everybody thought that black music would live and last. Soul music, British soul music, would live and last forever. The great Misha Paris that came out of gospel and into soul. But what we have here is the way in which the music industry runs. It's not like in America, where you have black-owned radio stations that spread across the east, the west coast, and so on, in which artists can string together a promotion right across those radios, and that have a radio announcers guild, of which everybody systematically takes part in what that black music is about. And that is part of what we need here. We thought we had it when we used to have all of the BBC radio stations used to have BBC radio programs for gospel music, and we used to be very, very powerful at that time. But that's changed a lot, and until we have our own independent way in which we can have systems that support our music and cooperation of those systems across the board. I mean, we can't talk about even having well-established labels like in America. Independent labels are very important. We don't have independently recognized black-owned labels, even though we know that there are those who own their own record labels, but they're not highlighted within a systematic way of which we manage our music.
Let me just go back to eBay with that question on how can we put the structures in place to ensure that our music is received outside of the black church, the black circle, and the black networking.
Sorry, say that again.
How can we ensure that our music is being played out on the other platforms outside of the standard black radio, black music network?
Well, number one, I have to agree with what Dave said. Production is very, very important. It is so, so important.
Okay. We have a problem with his music. That's not a problem. Basil, can you tell me what has been your experience going out of the UK and taking the gospel to other countries? Basil, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're back. Thank you.
Yeah, the reaction to LCGC in Europe and places like Russia, Japan, and Morocco, places like that, it's been tremendous. I think it's select music that I feel the people I'm sharing with will appreciate. And very often I will use message songs. Juliet spoke about that before. They won't necessarily respond favorably or understand some of the stuff that I might sing in my churches in UK.
Yeah.
But what they would recognize are popular songs that they might have heard on radio. So I will select some of those and include those in the repertoire. But songs that has a powerful message of humanity, of love, of respect, not necessarily with Jesus and God running all the way through it, because very often it's Muslim country we perform in. But God is good.
What I'm hearing from you is that even though it is black music, it was received outside of the UK in countries that don't necessarily have a good reputation of receiving black people.
Yeah, they're tapping into the art form. They love the art form, and they love the message of inclusivity. In other words, we're all the same. We're all equal. Black, white, Muslim, Christian. We're all humans, and therefore we need to embrace the unity and the benefits of us uniting as human beings. I think that's the message that we promote from the stage, and we do it with joy.
So would you say today that black music is being received well outside of UK, or is there a greater opening today than there's ever been before?
Well, gospel music gospel music has grown enormously in Europe, in particular. There are a number of British tutors who are traveling in and out of Europe, conducting gospel workshops. Americans have been doing it for years, but they're expanding now and recognizing that we are 2 hours away, and so we have a similar ability to be able to share gospel music with them. And so this is happening all over Europe. And people are embracing the start of the music. What I do on a personal level when teaching gospel, I start with the story of the origins of the music, which I think is important for them to understand where it's coming from and the cost in bringing it to.
Okay, well, we're going to move.
Can I say something?
Yes, come on and tell us a little bit more about how we can fix that with the social media.
I think I'm really privileged to be in a where I am an artist, have been an artist, won awards, done all that thing, touring, but I also now sit on the other side of the desk in a radio station, listening to music and thinking, do I play that? And my eyes have been opened, and it's been a huge journey to actually be quite straight with the message I have to give, particularly to black artists, that quality is important, like the guys were just saying, your production has got to be A1. And one of the other big things that radio stations are looking for are your followership, who is actually following you. Now, all that we've said about the history of gospel music, particularly, it is still a minute amount genre in Great Britain. It's just tiny. And whether we want to swan around thinking we're amazing, and of course we are, compared to the big genres out there, we are really, really tiny. And so we have to recognize that our following may be less, our impact might be less in the community, but we can build on that. I actually had somebody ring me once when I had done a lot of work with UCB Radio, arguing with me about why I wasn't playing their music. And I had to explain to this person, well, actually, it was to do with your production, and that's got nothing to do with your color. This person went off the deep end and felt that, I was misjudging them, but this was something that the whole team of listeners to our music had judged. So we've got to get that production right. You need to talk to people like eBay, people who are working at that level, who know what will go well with a radio station. And also,
sorry to interrupt you, Sandra. eBay's back with us now, and I want to take that question of why is it that people and artists in general feel that the DJs are not playing their music, or that you are the wall that they have to face that is not allowing their music to be played?
I don't think it's a wall. I think that as Sandra said, sometimes it's production. People need to understand that there's a radio edit. Sometimes people send in songs that are 20 minutes long or 10 minutes long, and there's no or sometimes it's people just worshiping, and then they think that is. I'm not saying that it's not bad, but I think you just have to use wisdom. Sometimes it's better to send something that is radio friendly.
Yeah.
You know, if it's your first single, send something that is radio, that's 3 minutes long, that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Sometimes people just send songs that it's just screaming and shouting and they say that that's going to connect with people. I think it's all about education as
well. And we lost him again. I think his network's really not well. Dave, you want to take that question for me, please? What the reason why people feel that the DJs are the one not allowing the music being played, or if they're working in a white station or in a station that is mostly white majority, that the DJ doesn't feel that he can play that music.
I hear you on that. And if you work in I think if you work in a white station, then it's going to be dominated by, in terms of telling you what to play at a certain time because of the playlist. It just goes on and on, really. Like I said, red tape. But getting back to what Ibe was talking about, production and stuff like that. Yeah, we always talk about it's got to be on point. It's so important to do that. And I just find it. I find it very difficult that some artists, won't take advice from key artists who's been there, who's done it. I mean, humble people. They won't even ask for any lessons or any advice on anything like that. So they go on their own 2 feet. Oh, I could do it myself. And before you know it, it's downhill. And that's it. Even your lyric, your content, and something I picked up on what Ibe said, you can't be speaking in tongues all the time on an album, on a single. Everybody's I'm not knocking it. Not everybody's going to understand that, because you have to remember the world you're broadcasting to. You're broadcasting to different parts of the nation. And they ain't going to understand that somebody stole my Honda or whatever you want to talk, speaking in tongues, whatever. It's not going to happen. So be very careful when you're writing a song, and make sure you put your heart in it. And I know when I hear a song, I can tell you this: if I hear a song, my chest feels really warm. That means you've got my attention already. And that is going to be such a big hit. When the DJ or presenter catches onto that, or the head of music at a radio station catches onto that, that is like gold dust. It's so beautiful when you have that, and they will support you 100%. But I think you really have to do your homework. Ask in terms about music, whether it be black music, that's what we're talking about, black gospel. Ask the key people who's been in there, who's done it, and stop messing around. That's
okay. But I'm gonna take this question to Sandra as well, because as a BBC presenter, you're probably more able to tell us how to break into those major outlets, because obviously gospel is not being played that much on there. We don't want to say that it's white privilege, and that's the reason why we're not being received. But what is your take on why gospel music is not being played on those stations?
I will just go back and just say to you, I do a lot of freelance work for UCB Radio. I recently released my own album. None of those songs didn't hit the playlist. One did. So it's real for me as everybody else. So I'll just put that as a caveat.
But, I'm sure I played it. I'm sure I played one of your songs.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying? I have to go through the same ritual, and they have a very set agenda as to what kind of music they're going to play. And if it falls outside of that boundary, that's how it is. But BBC, I get loads of people saying, "Can you play it? Can you play it?" Well, of course, BBC have to pay for the music that's played by that's made by you and I, and so I don't have any influence as to what's on their playlist, but I can have influence about talking about new releases that are personal to me, that I'm hearing about, songs that are affecting the community. And my advice has been, for the last however many years, to so many artists, move away from just singing about Jesus, although we want to do that, but our song should be affecting every part of the community. And that's when playlisters start to get interesting. Well, what is your song? What is your lament? Like Juliet was saying at this moment. What are you writing about knife crime? And then suddenly they start to be interested. What are you writing about relationships that break down, divorce, etc.? That to me is gospel music. It's a message. And I think as musicians and artists, we've steered away from the heart of why we're there in a community. We're there to share good news, not just about who Jesus is, but what does he do? We need songs about the environment. We do need to talk about what's going on with our youth and the community, and suddenly we become interested. So sitting on the side of the desk now where I am, where I'm looking at hundreds of these artists coming through, I'm having to just put them to one side. Your song isn't relevant for now. And so where are the songs for now that are talking about George Floyd, everything that's going on? And you will find that desperate producers, because they're all wanting stories, will start to find a way and an avenue to use your song. And it might not just be that it's on a playlist, but they'll play it as something to attach to a piece, to a bit of news, etc. We need to get away from just thinking about getting our song on the playlist. There are so many ways that I use songs now. And when you get a non-Christian producer like I had the other day contact me, said, Sandra, I've just been hearing a church on YouTube sing I think you call it a worship song. It's ever so nice. Can we have that in the show? And I'm like, dear God, what's going on? And why did you like it? She says, well, they were just singing about a heart of love for the community, etc. And I thought, if I could just show people how easy it is. So some deliberate, intentional thought about what our music can do in our community, I think, is what we need to get the interest and to get stations like the BBC on our side to help us, because they will help us propel the message. And the last thing I want to say is, while we are navel gazing and arguing amongst ourselves, we're not bringing a strategy together, and other faiths like Muslims, etc., are getting their act together. And you will find they are the first choice so many times, even myself.
Wow.
They're getting out there because they're listening all the time. What does our world need? And we will write about it, we will campaign about it, and we will involve as many people to get our message out there. We've got work to do.
I'm going to take Daniel on your take on, why is African gospel doing so well here at the moment in the UK and abroad, yet it's not appealing to necessarily to the community, as Sandra said, but it's still doing really well. And what's the magic formula?
Well, I would not. It's doing well, but I would say that it's still within certain borders. It's still within those of us who are African diasporas. It's still, within the four walls of most African churches, with the exception of few people like Senach, who has currently, broken through into mainstream. And even with that, I mean, I know a lot of people love Sinach, but even with that, Michael W. Smith had to sing that song before it gained the sort of prominence and momentum that it currently has.
Yeah.
So it's doing well, but still within certain borders, and it's limited. Now, let me quickly move away just slightly and talk about and contribute to what has been said with regards to why the music, the African music, I don't get into playlists and stuff. One, I think that for someone who did radio back home in Ghana and having worked in that space for a while and observed the landscape, unfortunately, most of I don't know how it is with Nigeria and other countries, but it may pretty much be the same. Most of the systems or most of the systems that the radio stations run in our African countries are very lax. So quality music or music that are not so much quality filter into playlists much more easily, not to talk about the issues of payola and all that kind of thing, which is another conversation. So then when it comes here, when the systems are much more stringent and much more rigid, it doesn't meet up to the standard. And I understand, Sandra was talking about people who don't understand why she doesn't play their music, because they are used to a particular system back home and they think that is the way it works here. So there has to be a whole new mindset shift for musicians that are coming from Africa. There has to be that mindset shift. Production need not be compromised, and we need to look out for what the radio stations really want. Now, my second point is the church needs to step into that space.
Yeah.
Dave P talked about us building our own systems, and there are a lot of influential African churches here in UK. There is no one of them that has even thought about, even not one of them. How about a couple of churches coming together to build a Christian radio station?
Yeah.
How about they doing that? They have the resources to do that. Why don't we have it? I know that there are radio stations that solely play maybe particular genre of music from from Muslim countries and for the Muslims and that kind of thing. Why are the churches not doing so? I always think, or I always say that one of the major problems we have with our African gospel music stems from the fact that the church is not supportive.
Okay.
The church is
I
not
don't
supportive.
think we need another church station. I don't think we needed churches building radio stations.
What do you offer?
Well,
our music being played outside, and what kind of structures do you think we need to put in place to make sure that the music coming out of the church, whether it's an African church or Caribbean church, is being played out there in great production?
Sorry, is that to me, Faith? Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Was it Juliet?
Mm-hmm.
What happened to Juliet? Juliet was answering.
Yes, I'm here. I'm saying that I don't think we need churches building a radio station. I think we got behind all the different good quality stations like UGN, being better. What we need is link up between these stations. As I was saying, that the American system is where all the stations, West Coast, East Coast, whatever coast that there is, they're linked up, and the airplay is something that's carefully connected and actually helps support artists in terms of what they do when they're promoting stuff. I think it's more to do with joined up, as Sandra Godley said, joined up strategic thinking, and actually for the church to invest into those who've been working at this music for many years to make us making systems that work for ourselves. When you create a product, it is in itself, when it goes into the music industry, the industry as it exists is income generating. You've got royalties. So what are we doing in terms of injecting our music and our creativity and getting behind products to help encourage generating the royalties? I'd like to see whether churches would more likely get into making films that support products that actually give greater opportunities for people like the great Basil Mead and the London Community Gospel Choir to have music out there. How about supporting more synchronization? How about giving us money so that we can get into film and stuff like that? And having our artists being supported. We need the church to give money to support the artist if it wants to help to spread the gospel. That's what it's about. So helping to spread the gospel.
So Basil, having your music out there, having performed in big auditorium and churches, what kind of structure do you think the UK is now lacking to be able to get our music out there, to be heard by anybody? We're saying that it's not a color thing. I've heard on the panel today. It's not necessarily has to do with racism, even though some of it might be systemic. But we're saying the music, if well produced, can be sent out there, but we do not have the system. What kind of system do you think needs to be in place to ensure that our music is delivered to the people?
I think to support our artists from the Black-led churches in particular, you need a system where they have equal access to the market that's out there. And I'm say this. I think what exists now is an imbalance in like the Black church playing or singing, performing music written by white Christian artists. Mm-hmm. The traffic is not going the opposite way. And that is one thing that must be settled. I mean, that for me is just systemic racism going on there.
Yeah.
Whether we want to admit it or not, this has been going on for years. I mean, I can name a number of fantastic albums written by people that I know from my community. They hardly or did not get any acceptance into the white church, but yet You can name all of the white artists with their guitar. Their music has been licensed by our black churches. Now, those white artists are being supported financially by getting their music. They get exposure. They get all of the benefits of their music being played in their white community as well as the black community. It does not happen for our black artists. That has to be fixed. That's a starter. On the artist side, I think we have to, as Dave and Ibe has been saying, we've got to work harder on our productions, on our performance level. And we cannot perform out of the church the way we perform in church. It's a different audience. The church, the audiences who might come to see you in a theater or in a festival are not necessarily church people. They might not understand the language that you use when you're in a church service, in a worship service. So you need to address the audience differently. You know, present yourselves, your music differently. And for me, those are two key areas that we need to get our artistry together, our productions, the way we present our music. We will always have two different markets. There's the church market and there's the non-church market. So we have to know how to relate to both. LCGC is predominantly in the non-church market. There's where we have been. So I've been able to see how things operate and maintain that. Very occasionally get an opportunity to do anything within a church environment. And I think we are probably the slightly quirky artist who gets an opportunity in church services because we are more regularly outside of church. And therefore we know how to work on audience and leave them without a doubt. We are people of faith, but we've just had them dancing. We've had them feeling good the way they have never felt before. What is it that's different about this music, this presentation? I think that's where we need to be aiming, is learning how to. Bible talks about if you're going to be winning souls is the term. You apply wisdom to what you do. And I think that's what needs to happen.
I think also you've got to understand, not everyone's called to be a singer.
No.
Not everyone, and X Factor is a prime example. You know, some people have this thing in their head that they're called to sing. I'm called to sing, and God has told me to sing, and let me just sing this song, and it comes out terrible. I had to prove a point one day to somebody who said that they were told that they can sing. I said, hey, let's do it. He kept telling me. I said, hey, let's record. Then when he heard his thing back, he knew that it was the wrong calling. You know, you have to know your calling, stay in your lane. You know, that's another thing. And the difficulty is, is telling somebody, you know, I'm not about, because I've been told that I will never amount to nothing. I've been told that I've never been good. And that's a difficult, when somebody gives you their music and you think, oh man, this is not good at all. And they really feel that this is good. If you're an artist out there, always get a second opinion. And don't go to your friends, because your friends will always tell you that it's good. Oh, come on, somebody, you did really good. No, go to somebody that will tell you the truth. You know, if you're, and also, because there are a lot of people out there that will take your money as well. Go there, you have to really pray about who you want to work with and who's going to mentor you. Don't just go out there, because a lot of people will go to producers and they will give them a Casio sounding sound. You know, I'm being real here, and then they want to play it on the radio. You know, you've got great artists like Noel Robinson, you've got Becca Folks, you've got Lorene Cato, you've got all these artists that are producing great stuff and taking it to a next level. You know, those are the people to look to, and you know, especially in this country.
And I'm going to take this question to Dave, and then back to Juliet. We're coming to the end of the program. We're really pushing on time. Dave, we've heard that gospel music has to be produced to a level where the production needs to be good, but it needs to translate to people outside of the church. What has been, I know you play all genre and all styles on your station, and what do you think is the formula that should work so that it crosses over?
I don't know if there's a formula, but I just want to pick up a point what Basil was talking about some of our churches, and I'm very straight to the point. I'm very outspoken, and I'm not concerned about what anybody says really. White and black. Now the problem is The problem is to do with our praise and worship leaders and some of our pastors. These are the key people who are supposed to say, listen, I know you're singing a white artist song, right? But what about some of our black artist music who are writing some great worship songs, right? What are you doing? So sometimes it's your praise and worship leader who are so tuned into different types of music, which is not associated with anything concerning black gospel music, you know? So the easiest thing to do, introduce them to I don't know, let's say any white artist. What's kind of a deception for me is Sinaj with that song Waymaker, you know what I mean? And you're not on the cover of that, and it's a great praise and worship song, but I think sometimes some of our praise and worship leaders need to really stand up and do more, and even some of our pastors and bishops. I don't know what else to say concerning quality. I mean, it's a no-brainer really. Just do the best you can and focus on, get to know who you are. Know exactly what you want to sing, how you want it produced, find the right producer instead of paying thousands of pounds and your music stays in a download store and don't even move. You know, so that's all I have to say on that point. I just think quality, I think God demands quality because that's what he gave us. He gave us gifts and talents, and it's just about quality for me. And you can't sell it. It works. I don't know. It's very difficult to explain because I just think sometimes we just need to be straight about what we're doing. I know I am, because I just run a radio station the way I want it to run, how I understand it. And I feel the artists and I support and appreciate everything they do, you know. But if they send me the music and I don't like it, I wouldn't know. I'll just say, listen, you need to do this on that. I'm not a great singer, I'm not a producer, but I will point you in the right direction to a great producer quite easily. But don't waste your money. Concentrate on your craft. Get it right. That's important. Again, it's a no-brainer, really.
So as we come into the end of the program, I'm going to ask the question, which was the topic of today. Does black or gospel music matter? And if it does, how are we going to ensure going forward that our music is going to impact the world by crossing over to the wide platforms?
You got to stop this. You got to stop this. You got to stop this clique hanging together. You got to branch out. Some people don't believe in unity, and I always say this: when it comes to unity, people always seem to think, "I've got the spirit of non-sharing. Why should I share? Because I think I'm going to take your fan base, you know." But we need to get together. I think that is the key factor, and understand each other's role and respect what they do, because you just never know. If you speak to that one person, he or she might be able to guide you in that right direction where you become bigger, and then you could pass that down to your to the next generation. The next generation want it now, want it now, want it now. What are you doing? We want it now. Stop the talking and get on with the job. That's it.
I'm going to go to Sandra and ask her to give us, in a few words or at least 1 minute, what does black music matter today, and is it going to receive the respect it deserves from the wide platform?
Yes, with the history that we have, the background that we've all come from, the hardship that our black ancestors have had to endure, we owe it to ourselves and the next generation to be creative, to think outside of the box, to forgive, and to ask the Holy Ghost, what now? Because he has got some crazy ideas. And I've just written in my little box here, now is the time, the edge of the pandemic finishing, now is the time to really launch into the heart of the Holy Spirit and say, what should we do? There's a God-shaped hole that the pandemic has caused. We need to fill.
Maybe.
Well, as Sandra said, you know, we've been in a time of pandemic. This should have been a time where You should have learned an art. Learn your art form. You know, YouTube is there. There are people there that can guide you. You know, listen, I bought a machine the other day. I had to learn it. I went on YouTube and I learned it. You know, learn your art, learn your craft. Get mentors that will tell you the truth. It does matter. Black music does matter. It always has mattered. It's mattered from the start. It's just that we just got to get it right in this country. We have to come together, egos put down, and just make this thing work.
Basil, you've traveled the world with the gospel music, and I have a question on the platform that says, does gospel music need to be crossing over?
It has always crossed over.
Okay.
It has always been there. It has influenced all of the other genres that are around us, popular music. And I think it's important for us to own it and not feel that we have to change it in order to be accepted. I think it's important that people recognize the origin and the source of what they enjoy, what they've embraced and are making a living from. It is from our community. And if we don't own it and, really get to know it, as eBay is saying, get to know your music, get to know how you can create it in its best form, the highest quality you can, we will always be moving around in the pond. But once we embrace that, people like Bob Marley, if you look at the artists of old, James Brown, they're very unique styles. You look at so many of the artists that we celebrate today. Gospel music has its own. Commission is one group that eBay was motivated by. You've got so many of them, whole stream. Kirk Franklin today. You've got Donald Lawrence in the choir side. Specific styles of music that coming from the Black community, we have that strength, that depth of quality. We need to develop this, own it, and keep producing at the highest quality. We need to aim for that.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well, I'm going to go to Daniel, because Daniel, of course, you have experience of the African music and the African gospel music, which to me, from where I live here in the UK, has had a great impact on all the African churches, but has not been able to cross over to the Caribbean churches in a great way, let alone to the white churches. And what can we do to rectify that for the future?
Well, I think that Dave P mentioned that we and then Basil as well. The churches need to step in. Our bishops and pastors need to critically consider, and if the praise and worship leaders critically work at it and making sure that we ourselves, as African-led churches, give ourselves enough representation of the music that we present our church. And after we've owned it and we've filled our own space with our music, then there will be an overflow for it to cross over. That's what I would say, really. The church needs to support. And like Juliet was saying as well, I mean, the church needs to support existing structures. People that are already in that space doing it, go in there and push it for it to be what it has to be and get to the level that it needs to get to.
Juliet, as the founder of the Gospel Music Alliance, I want to ask the question, and the question is, we've been having this discussion for a while, and we've been having this discussion for years. Everybody is screaming out for structure, for a way or stairs to how to get there. What can GMIA offer today as startup to a discussion, I'm sure, that will continue in terms of putting structures in place, bringing people together, uniting the African and the Caribbean church, and also helping artists to be able to put out their products out to the platforms which are available and which we want to hit as well with the gospel music.
We're probably the most exciting time for gospel music and British gospel music in particular. This is the most exciting time, and GMIA has and is going through a tremendous amount of transformation and transitions. We've just got a new board of directors on, which includes some very wonderful individuals, Karen Gibson, Anna Amidei, Tolu Adebegba, Kevin Tomlin. Should I go through the name? It's 9 new directors. And all of these people are linked to different regions that are being developed within gospel music. O'Neill Dennis with the Step Forward and Adebayo from Seven Gospel Tracks have been part of developing a system. I think Basil said it, when we've got to own our music. So whatever is going to happen, I've had a very exciting phone call to me recently, and I believe some very new developments are underway as we come out of this pandemic that will show that we are not only owning it for ourselves, taking responsibility for ourselves, not blaming white people, not blaming the establishment. We are taking responsibility for ourselves, and then also to build whatever it is that we're going to do. It needs to be built. It needs to be waterproof, type-proof, cohesive. We've not been together as in the way that we should have, but I believe that by the Holy Spirit, we're entering into this new phase of that. And also, we are the ones who create the demand for our music.
Yeah.
We create great music, and like the golden age of British gospel music was people making great music, Paradise, that I had the privilege of bringing to the forefront of gospel music. They were great creative group of people. We need to see the whole thing to do with groups coming back, soloists in their strength, female and male, quartets, the whole thing going like it did in the 80s. And it's a new time. So I'm excited about what we can do. But you know what? It's all up to us. If we don't do it, it won't happen. And so therefore, own it, build it, create the demand for it, and it will happen.
So I'm going to close with the 3 radio DJs, Sandra and Dave P and Ibe, and Daniel. So the 4 of you, I want, and the question from the panel, which is asking, what do we need to do to make sure that UK artist music is played on the radio? That is the recurring question tonight on the Facebook Live, and I think our viewers want a proper answer or a clear answer how to get their music out.
I think there are many radio stations in the UK right now, and the best thing to do is do your research. I know we have social media, we have Twitter. It doesn't make any sense you tagging a station in on Twitter and say, yeah, play my music, and you haven't sent it. The most common thing is to just send it. And like I said before, make sure you check out the station's format, and there are stations who really support artists. Independent radio stations, they do very well on doing that. The world's a big oyster in terms of like getting your music out there. And social media, the station would help you in a way anyway, but make sure you just send your music. Go to the website. Don't ring up, don't send my music. Just read the contents and just send it by email, MP3,
In terms of when we look at the artists, as Basil was saying earlier on, the music to be able to be played in the music station has to be fluid and not too churchy and not too screaming about Jesus, even though the message can be there, but it must be settled. So you need to know really which market you're targeting.
Well, I remember I was told I was told before when I handled an artist's music, they said, oh, this music is really great, and I said, okay, well, it's not that good to play on radio. It's got Jesus in there. I said, it doesn't matter if it's got God or Jesus in there. The thing is, the quality is not good. You really need to pick up on that and do that. So I think, be more open to your surroundings, to what people are going through. And that's the main part of our walk with Christ. So when we walk with him, we understand, and we have to. We don't have a choice. We grow in him, we walk with him, we pray to God to give us wisdom, and this is what we have. And let's be wise here. When you're writing a song, make sure, because you just never know who's listening. You just never know. At a certain time of the day, they may be going through something really traumatic, and that one song you've written, you wrote, could really solve a lot of issues and bring them more closer to either the music or to God. And that's it. That's all I can say on that.
eBay?
Yeah, there are so many radio stations out there, not just Christian, but there are secular ones. If you know, a prime example, a great track that did so well was Shackles. Such a great song, you know. That, and I'm not saying that every song will cross over, and it's not about crossing over, but it was a great song. What I would say to you is keep persisting, learn your craft. That's all I can say. Learn your craft, study. I'm a producer. I study producers. I'm not the best singer, but I do what I can do to the best that I can do. And then I have people or mentors who will tell me, right, no, that's wrong. Put that in there or put that in there. Mentorship, learn your art.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to go to Sandra. I know you're doing a lot when it comes to helping out artists in your end of the world in the north.
Yeah.
Before we close, what do you propose the artists should do to get their music out to your platforms?
Dave has already mentioned study the stations that you want to affiliate yourself with and look at their rotation of songs. UCB Radio, who I do a lot of work with, you'll see they have a huge rotation of songs, lots of new artists, but the quality is always great. But also your way into stations like that is through your story quite often. And often your story will get to the station before your song does. And so what I would say is listen to the program, see if you can approach them and say, look, I've got a story about healing. And actually out of that came this song. And that's a different routine, but it gets your song played. Also, I mean, we did a huge campaign here at the BBC. We have a lockdown opportunity for singers to come together, anybody in the community, and joining with a song. And I know that appeal went to Christians in our region. Hardly any Christian came forward to actually help out. So what I'm trying to suggest is that sometimes you need to join in with what's going on at the moment to get your voice heard. Serve somebody else's dream, serve your community. If they're asking for songwriters to write songs about lockdown, why are we not doing that? So that's a good way in. Look at who's on the rise in the music industry, and maybe approach them and say, look, can I duet with you? Can I do something with you? Can I do a FaceTime live with you? A bit of a jig, a bit of a song. Again, that's another route in to get your song. And like I've said before, create a story. Your story may get to the playlist or the sound of the station before your song does. And finally, BBC Introducing is a massive opportunity for artists, Christians or non-Christians, to get your music heard. And the amount of Christian artists I keep saying, send your music to BBC Introducing, tell them why you want that song played. And they are looking for songs of hope, all the things that are positive that we can bring, and they are sitting waiting there. But so many Christians don't want to do that. There are paths already out there. There are organizations that always teach you how to run your business as a musician. There's artists guilds and they're all around there. The Musicians Union. Join these organizations and learn your skill, like everyone said, and you will make it. You're not always going to be touring, but you might just be writing great songs that are for films or for your community, whatever.
Thank you so much. Well, I want to say thank you to all of you. We went way over time, but I wanted to get a lot of information through this program today, and I'm so pleased that you have come on. Thank you so much, Sandra Godley from Coventry. Thank you, Dave P. from UGN Jams Radio. Thank you, Basil Main from LCGC Choir. And thank you so much, eBay from, well, I would say Premier Radio. And thank you, Daniel Datson, also ex-ABN radio presenter. And we also have on our page today the information about how to get hold of each and every one of them. If you want to send your music to the radios, we also have on LCBN our own independent radio. If you want to submit your tracks, please send them to the address on the page. We play all types of gospel music. And so if you have some music sitting at home waiting to be heard, please send it down as an MP3 to the station. We are here to promote gospel music. We are here to help as a TV and as a station. So please give us a call and try and find out what LCBN is up to. We're a new Black networking TV, and we are here to help the community. Thank you so much for joining. The program went over time today, but it was necessary. Please send in your questions. And if you want a part 2 with my guest, you need to send your request now so I can book them on time for a part 2. But thank you so much for your time for this evening. Thank you to my guests for taking the time to speak into my program today. It was Roundtable Show with Reverend Faith. Thank you for tuning in.
Lifecom Broadcasting Network TV, aka LCBN TV, is committed to bringing the transformation message of Jesus Christ into homes across the world, providing hope in the most desperate situations. We are passionate about souls, reaching the lost, the hurt, and the lonely, and by a click of a button, God can change a person's life forever. Watch LCBN TV channel 24/7 on UK Freeview channel 271, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, See Love World, Google TV, LCBNTV.com, LifecomTV.com. Download LCBN TV app from Google Play and App Store. LCBN TV, just in time.